Hey, Jean, we are now live. Hey, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. I'm excited to have Jean with Esther with us today. Anytime I can hear the words artificial intelligence and craft beer in the same sentence, I get really excited. And Jean's going to talk a little bit about today how we can use artificial intelligence. There we go. I haven't been drinking, I swear. And the data you get from craft beer drinkers to better understand consumer preferences and just make your brewery more successful. So at this point, Jean, I think you have a really exciting story to share. I'm excited to pass the floor to you. So welcome. Excited for you to be here today.
Thank you, Andrew. I appreciate it, and I appreciate everyone watching or taking the time now or later, close to the holidays, to listen to what we have to say. And so, just wanted to mention that I'm sure the past week has been like the past month and the past year, big grind, trying to survive and trying to make everything work. I just wanted to make sure that my optimism in this hour will flow through, and hope that you can take the time to look at the future a little bit, and how artificial intelligence can help with that. Um, I also hope that we can have a little bit of an interactive discussion. So I'm hoping the talk itself will take somewhere between 30 and 40 minutes, depending on how much I talk. But if you have questions, comments, I'm trying to keep half an eye on the comment section here, and I'll try to address questions during the session as they come. And I'd like to start by introducing myself a little bit. So my name is Jean. I'm originally from Belgium. I was born in Leuven, but I currently live in New York City together with my wife Alana and my 2-year-old. I started Ester 2 years ago, together with my co-founder, and I want to share two things that basically are the core of why I went into this business and into this company. And the first one is basically my childhood, and it has to do with my opinionation when I was a kid. I don't even know if that's an English word, but I was a very opinionated kid, and to the despair of my mom, I would always say, like, I think this is good, I think this is bad, and there was no arguing about it. And so this Latin idiom that translates as "there is no arguing about taste and color" was really important to me. And so later on, when I grew up, I became very curious about understanding why people liked what they like, and why someone would like Brussels sprouts and so many other people would hate it. And so that's kind of what drove me to go to college and started studying food science. And the second story is that I went into food science and ended up doing my master thesis about beer and wine, and we did a bunch of, in the beer brewing lab in Leuven, we did a bunch of research in a world-renowned laboratory on the chemical and sensory analysis of beer and wine. And we tried to tie it to why consumers like what they like. And so that was really important to me. But at the same time, I also started to adopt this appreciation for the craftsmanship of it all. And so definitely growing up in Leuven, where there's a lot of old, brewing craft, and a lot of experience, a lot of small breweries and craft brewers as well. I've always had this appreciation and fascination for people that are using their experience and their craftsmanship to create consistently good beer. And so that's kind of what drove me to go into Ester and to start with Ester. And to give you a little bit of insight in that craftsmanship, and go a little bit further into that, I want to share a couple of stories. And the first one is the one of Lindemans. And I'm sure most of you will know Lindemans. They've been in the US market for 40 years. But when they came here from Belgium 40 years ago, they've had to go through a lot of changes in their product, in their packaging, and their supply chain, to really find a connection with the American consumer. And so, to their credit, they went through all of that, and they pushed through and became pretty successful in the US and became a popular brand in the US. But at the same time, they took an enormous amount of risk. and they went through pretty steep investments and a lot of risk taking to get their beer into this new market. And my opinion personally is that, you know, it shouldn't be this difficult to bring an amazing, beautiful product to the right consumer. A second story that I want to share has a little bit of connection to that. It's kind of the other opposites, and maybe you know this, maybe you don't, but in the Belgian press a few months ago, there was a lot to do about Victoria, a new beer that was launched by AB InBev, that is a strong blonde ale, and in Belgium got a lot of attention as a copy or mimic of Duvel, a very popular beer in Belgium. And I haven't tasted Victoria, so I can't say anything about whether it's true or not. But you know, this is something that you see in the market really often, is where one beer does really well, and a lot of other brewers willingly or unwillingly, consciously or unconsciously, start, you know, going into or converging towards that same style. And that's also something that you know, pushed me to think about how can we prevent that? How can we make sure that there is enough innovation and enough divergence in the markets of beer and craft beer? And then a third story that I definitely want to share is when I was talking to a local mid-sized brewer in Belgium, I was talking to him, and he was telling me that their brewing team, would create over one new beer a month that they thought would have a place in the market and would be good enough for the market. And when I asked him, like, well, I don't know that many beers from your brand, like how come they don't all make it to market, and how many do you bring to the market? He said, well, we probably market one every 5 years. Which means that 59 beers don't make it to market, which I thought was such a pity, because I know that they have a lot of experience and are very good brewers. And so I asked him about it, and he said, it's too risky for us. It's too capital intensive. We need to spend too much money to really make it work for us. And we don't know enough whether a beer is going to be able to survive in the market, in the Belgian competitive market of beer. And all of those stories together basically told me, like, well, is there something that I, with my science background, can do? And in this session, I want to focus on a couple of elements. And so I want to talk in the first place about artificial intelligence and what it is and what it's not, because I'm not always sure that everybody understands it the way it needs to be understood. But then secondly, I want to dive into how artificial intelligence can be used to be applied on flavor and flavor experience. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that. But first, artificial intelligence. And when someone asks me, what is artificial intelligence? I would always say, well, what we're doing is mimicking the human brain. We're creating computer systems that basically can act and do a number of tasks that typically you need a human for. This can be vision, this can be very complicated math, it can be language, etc. But those are the areas where artificial intelligence typically comes into play. And to give you an example that is a little bit connected to the brewing world, what is not artificial intelligence is what typically, if you go buy beer online, what you see in a web shop. You see these filter systems and these categories, and you can search for a name or a style of beer, but that's about it. That's obviously not artificial intelligence. The artificial intelligence version of that is actually the bartender, is a human today, right? It's in this case not AI yet, but the other opposite is that you can ask a bartender what you want, and the bartender will go into an interaction with you. They'll ask you what you like and what you had before. Maybe they already know because you're a regular in that bar, and they really can give you recommendations that are a lot more detailed and take into account a lot more information than that filter system on the left. And basically what AI is going to do is try to mimic that bartender. And it's going to try to create that same experience that the bartender gives you, but artificially. And if you look at, the applications for that, there's a bunch of things where we don't need that kind of AI. But if you look at beer, it's actually the perfect example. It's a very complex product with a lot of different properties, flavor properties, product properties, packaging, etc. There's a lot of variety in assortment. So if you go to a store, you'll see that there's hundreds and hundreds of beers in front of you. And then on the consumer side, every consumer is different, and every consumer is going to appreciate a beer for a different reason. And so all of that together causes very, very, very difficult decision making for the consumer, but also for the retailer. The question what to put in their assortment is not an easy one to answer. And for the producer as well, the question what product to make, what product will work in the market is really, really difficult to answer. And because it's so complex, it's a very interesting one for AI, and it actually makes for a great AI problem. And then, I think when we think of artificial intelligence, one of the greatest examples of, the AI that helps people find their way has been done by Amazon. And I think Amazon was on the forefront of using artificial intelligence to make better and stronger recommendations. But even for them, it didn't come from day one. And this is a screenshot from a very old version of Amazon, where they would look at the title, and if you would buy a book that had the word Google in there, they would recommend you other products, other books in that case, that also had that word Google in there. So it was pretty rudimentary in the beginning. But then after that, they started looking at similar buying patterns from consumers. And I would start to put consumers into different groups, basically saying if there is 1,000 people that like book 1, 2, and 3, and I as a consumer come in there and I buy book 1 and 2, then the recommendation is going to be, well, you should read book 3, right? And that was the second big step in their recommendation system. And it's only after that they started to look at what is in the books themselves, and they started analyzing language, they started analyzing styles, and now their recommendation systems are a lot more sophisticated than that for books and for a bunch of other products. And that's basically the evolution that AI went through over the last couple of years. Now, as a brewer, the question becomes, why would you use artificial intelligence, and where does it make sense to use it? And one of the elements that I want to focus on is the difference between AI and a lot of other sources of data and insights that we have today. And to me, the big difference between the two is that AI allows you to understand the world instead of having to simplify it. And I use that word simplify with the greatest deal of respect for everyone that has been simplifying the world, because it's how we cope, right? It's a very human thing to do. But the example that I want to give here is the example of a blind tasting. And this is what we've been doing for years and years. If we want to know anything about how a consumer will, experience the flavor of a product, the way we measure that is by trying to eliminate all the noise around it. So we are putting the person in a white, tasting booth, and we serve the beer in a black glass, and we try to deprive them of any noise that might influence their tasting. What artificial intelligence allows you to do is to look at that same data, but with the noise, and you include the noise, because in the noise, in all the contextual information, in all the the people that are around you, whether you're in a bar or in a restaurant or at home, like all those elements, the glass, the brand of the bottle, they are inherently part of the flavor experience. And so there is signal in that. There is an explanation in that. It gives you information. And so really importantly for us is that AI is basically the gateway to make sense of that complicated information instead of always having to simplify everything. So a good example of that simplification is that it's at some point, and I don't exactly know when it happens, but a bunch of years ago, there were a bunch of reports that IPAs were very popular, and you know, that data and that insight came from focus groups. It came from sales data. It came from, you know, what consumers were talking about. It came from Google data. And so what you got was a situation in which everybody wanted an IPA. And it was kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy in the sense that all the growth brands became IPAs, and every brewery was starting to make IPAs. That was great because I'll be the first one to admit I'm a big IPA fan, and I love IPAs, and there's a bunch of good IPAs out there. But at some point, I'm not always sure if everyone still knew why IPAs were so popular and why consumers were drinking IPAs, right? Was it because they enjoyed the bitterness or the hoppiness so much, or the citrus elements, or was it because of the fact that it was an IPA? Which basically made it very hard for people to differentiate out of that IPA category. And so it was very, very simple to make yet another IPA because you kind of knew that it was going to work. But at the same time, there was an opportunity to make, you know, to take some of the elements of an IPA, but then differentiate and create something new and innovate, right? And this is one of the big dangers of artificial intelligence, is that in a lot of circumstances, it leads to convergence. And using these recommendations, using these insights, if you don't use them well, they're going to point you into the direction of more of the same. And so there's a lot of algorithms out there that will recommend you more of the same. And that's, I think, something to be very careful with, because as an industry, it's not necessarily what we want. We, as craft brewers, want to have divergence. We want to have diversity in flavors, right? And have all these kinds of different beautiful products with their own packaging and their own brands that make it into the markets. And so that's something that we really work on really hard when we apply AI, is that we do it in a way where it does not lead to convergence. And that's really important to us. A second problem, and this is underestimated a lot by a lot of people, is that if you want to get good insights from artificial intelligence, you need really, really good data. And this is underestimated a little bit. So we always say, if you want to understand a product, you need to really analyze the product, and you can probably use some of the data that you find online. And this is a random beer, and I found the product description online. It gives me a ton of information about, you know, the beer itself and the label, and it gives me tasting notes, and it gives me a description of the brewery and the story behind the brewery, which is amazing. That's great information. But if I want to point someone at a flavor, then I'm probably going to need more data than this. And I think there's been the connection to AI, or the connotation to AI, that if you just have enough data, you'll get the insights you need. And my opinion on that is that that's just not true. You need good data. You need the data that will have the insights that you want to generate inherently present, right? It needs to be in there. If not, you're not going to get it out there. So those are two major problems of artificial intelligence, or I'll say challenges that need to be overcome, and that we as a company are also actively trying to overcome. And if you overcome those, you can really do some quite amazing things, right? You can basically add the Spotify experience to beer. And I'm sure everyone here that uses Spotify a couple of weeks ago got their overview of 2020 and also got an overview of songs that got away, right? The songs that you missed, or songs in a different genre than what you usually listen to. And that's the beauty of Spotify's algorithm, is that they not only look at listening patterns, they also look at what is inside of the music. They look at sound patterns, they look at instruments, they look at beats per minute. They really try to take that into account, which allows them to go beyond the type of recommendations, like, you know, if you like Charlie Mingus, I'm going to recommend you John Coltrane because it's also jazz, right? It goes a lot further than that. And that's the kind of experience that we want to add to beer, where it's not because you love an IPA that we're going to recommend you another IPA, but we might recommend you a fruit beer that has the same citrusy flavor that you find in that IPA that you had. And that brings me to the second big topic of this talk, and that's flavor intelligence. And one of the key elements that you know, I talked a little bit about it, is that we know and we see that around 85% of new product launches in consumer packaged goods fail. And there's a lot of discussion about this number, so I'm not gonna go too far into that, but we know that, you know, it's a lot. It's risky to launch a new product. So what people try to do is, you know, they try to take away that risk. And a lot of taking away that risk is by just doing something that is more safe. And one of the reasons why we don't try to, or don't always, you know, take those risks is because we don't necessarily have the right data. And I'm not saying there's no data, right? Because there is a lot out there. I gave a couple of examples here between, you know, the trend reports that are being published all the time. There's a bunch of IRI data that is available, and there's all kinds of market research reports from Nielsen, Kantar, all those companies. And even for craft brewers, you know, you have your connection to the market as well, which is probably the most in-depth information that you can find, where you know from your customer what they like and don't like. But even then, it's not always easy when you create a new beer and craft a new beer to kind of know like who's going to be the audience of this, to get an idea of where and how to market it. And that's something that we thought was really an opportunity, in the sense that our opinion is, if you can add better data into that mix, you can make more confident choices as a brewer. And when we talk about better data, we talk about better data about the product and about the consumer. And I know that I have a wine example here, but the same goes for beer. But about the consumer, we are trying to understand, you know, who that consumer is, what their flavor preferences are, what their previous experiences are, but also for what occasion they're buying, for what occasion they're looking for something. Are they the food pairing that they want to do, et cetera, et cetera. And on the product side, we have to go beyond the typical product data that you have, like the label and the name, which is important, but we wanted to add a chemical and sensory analysis to that. And we take into account any data point that we believe has or can have an impact on the flavor experience. And then better data starts with a comprehensive flavor analysis. And as I said, that starts with a chemical and sensory analysis, and then we add all that product data. And just all those data points together, they really allow us to go make a flavor map and create something that allows us to really, you know, compare products to each other, and also show where in the markets a certain product is. And the sketch or the figure on the right shows an example from the book that Kevin Verstrepen from the University of Leuven wrote a couple of years ago, where he analyzed 250 Belgian beers following this same method and mapped them on that flavor map. And sort of that IPA is a Belgian IPA that is an example of where this ends up. I want to jump in and take a small sidestep towards sensory analysis. And I know that all of you probably do sensory analysis, and I hope that you do, whether that's within your team or the brewing team or everyone in the company or in your, with your customer at some point. It is important to do sensory analysis, but not all sensory analysis is the same. And to me, the two extremes are, the rate beer sensory analysis that is basically a consumer appreciation by evaluation with some, that the people that use rate beer are going to be a little bit more knowledgeable than your typical consumer. And then on the other hand, you have the very, very technical scientific kind of analysis that is being done in the book here. Which is very, very much focused on quantifying certain elements that you can find in the chemistry of the product right now. And so what we want to say when we talk about sensory analysis, we typically talk about that technical sensory analysis, and we don't necessarily talk about consumer analysis or even the type of sensory analysis that is being done by, for example, the purchasing team at a retailer. Because they are going to taste the product already with a certain goal in mind. And what we want scientifically is to have people do that sensory analysis with nothing else in their brain except, I am trying to understand what the flavor elements of this beer are. And that's kind of what we look for. But if you want to understand the whole flavor, or if you want to go towards flavor intelligence, so on the one hand you understand the product, but on the other hand you understand the consumer. And to me, it was really, really important to go beyond, what you could call the Yelp approach, right? Which is just people saying, I give a score from 1 to 5. What we absolutely wanted was to add a reasoning behind that, and to get people to give us insight, not only in whether they like a product or not, but also why that was. And this image that I took from an advertising campaign in Vienna is a great example, because it shows a consumer giving an online review that says it was horrible because they didn't have takeaway coffee. While the experience that they were trying to create was just the experience of, taking time and having a moment for yourself, which did not have anything to do with takeaway coffee. And so understanding that why, and that's the reason why I show this, understanding the why behind someone's appreciation, that is basically where we try to make the difference. But that means that you need to gather a lot of data points. And so we are on a mission to gather as many as we can, starting with contextual information, starting with the weather and the time of when you were drinking a beer, starting with mood and emotion, and understanding, having a beer on a Friday night after work is not going to be the same as having a beer in the summer on the beach, right? And so those can be two very different experiences. But the core question that we want to know every time all over again is to understand what stood out for you as a consumer. So that's always what we want to understand. And the reason why we go so much into that contextual emotional side is because flavor experience is emotional. And the best example of that is a Proust effect. And Proust was a French philosopher. And so he famously told a story about, him smelling madeleines, these cakes that you see on the photo. And the minute he smelled them, he would be catapulted back into his childhood when his grandmother was making him these same cakes. And it was such a strong memory in his brain that the flavor of madeleines and the smell of madeleines would be something that he would immensely enjoy, just because it had that connotation with his childhood. And the reason why I always talk about this is because a lot of our flavor and a lot of our flavor experience doesn't happen on our tongue or in our nose or in our mouth. it happens in our brain, and it has to do with the context, what we're seeing, what we're hearing, but just also how we connect all those dots to what we're feeling. And that feeling is what we're after. That's what we want to understand. Another dimension to make it even more complicated is language. And there is not only an individuality in flavor perception. So in some people taste bitter much more than other people. There is a difference in how we experience it, and I might like bitter and you might not like bitter. But then there's also a difference in how we talk about it. And so for some people, there might be very little difference between sweet and fruity, for example. And for other people, it might mean something totally different. So when we are trying to figure out why a consumer likes what they like, the most important thing is that we also try to translate their language into something that we can understand. So a consumer that tells me this beer is extremely fruity, then I want to go look in the chemistry of the beer and see if it is fruity, or maybe it is not that fruity and it's much more sweet. And that tells me that that consumer might use sweet and fruity for the same sensory experience. And so those kind of patterns are basically what we're after for any individual consumer. And then the question, and I'm not going to go too deep into this, but the question always becomes, how do you gather data? How do you get that data from a consumer? And again, like that's another topic for another talk at another point. But what we do is basically build our technology. We translated that into a recommendation engine that we can build into an existing consumer experience. So we take the website or the web shop of a retailer or a craft brewer where they sell beer, and we basically add our conversational technology or our chatbots to guide a consumer through the assortment and to help them find the beer or the wine that is going to match their flavor preference best. And so in that process, we give added value to that consumer, but we also gather a lot of information about why they like what they like. And that's the patterns that we then use to build our decision-making tool. And that's what I'm after. I want to create a tool that helps the producer make very confident decisions about launching a new beer, about making certain marketing and sales decisions, about pricing their beer even, and also about when it's time to make changes in the portfolio. And maybe, a beer that has always been kind of a year-round brew, maybe it should become a seasonal, and vice versa. Maybe a seasonal should become part of the year-round. And those kind of decisions are the ones that we are trying to support. The insights that you get from all of that data, both the product data and the consumer data, are incredibly, incredibly valuable. And in the future, we'll be able to answer questions as who's the target market for your beer, and who is the audience for that? Where are growth opportunities? Are the growth opportunities with a different audience, or with a different geography, or with a different branding, for example? And that's the kind of information that you as a brewer can then adapt your decision making to. But also important and interesting to know is, why and when will a consumer buy? Why do they buy my beer? And when is it going to work best? Because that allows you to make marketing efforts that are going to be a lot more efficient. And then all of that, this is something that we're launching in the next couple of weeks. All of that comes together in an analytics platform that shows you all the insights that we have. And I'll be very transparent. The first version of the platform is not going to include all of these features, but what we can give is insights in your beer, in your portfolio, and give you insights into the competition, and every beer that makes it into our database that we get to test, that comes and gets a place in this platform, and will show the analytics to all the brewers out there. And my goal with that platform, and this is really, really important. So the goal with the platform is that we really want to make sure that every brewer can access a comprehensive flavor analysis at an affordable price. And so we think that we need to level and even the playing field and make sure that it's not only the big brewers that have access to this kind of data, but that also a craft brewer gets access to this kind of dynamic, flavor-driven market information, so they can grow their business and so they can make decisions about the next product that they're going to make, hopefully leading to a bunch of innovation. Another big advantage of this kind of logic is that through our platform, we're also going to try and connect brewers and their beers with both retailers and consumers. And so we want to share the flavor data we have, not in its raw form. That's something that we keep for the brewer themselves. But the overviews of that, we want to share with retailers that are always looking for new beers to put in their assortments, and also to consumers, to help a consumer really find their way into the depth and the width of the assortment and of all the beers that you can find in the market. And then it starts with the flavor analysis, and that's why, and this is my last slide before I finish up, it starts with the flavor analysis. And so what we are doing right now is we're running an early adopter program, where we basically are hoping to get as many beers in our database as possible. This early adopter program runs until the end of January, but we hope that we get a lot of people signing up. And if you want to send your beer and if you want to have your beer analyzed, feel free to just shoot a quick email to contact@ester.ai, and we'll onboard you as soon as possible. So the way it works now is that you do a $9.99 payment per beer that you want to send, and you send the beer to our warehouse in New York. And as soon as we are doing the analysis itself, you'll get access to the platform where you get all the raw data. You get access to the platform where you can see competition insight. You can see comparisons with market data, based on market data. And you will get access to the platform that is continuously evolving and where we're going to add features as we go. A last thing there is that in 2021, we're focused on launching a consumer website as well, where a consumer can go and look for amazing flavors and amazing beers. And of course, the beers that are in our database are going to be the ones that get featured on that website. And that's, in a nutshell, what I wanted to talk about. And I want to end with a message of optimism, basically, again, where I think that the end goal and success for Ester would mean that every craft brewer, every brewer in the US gets access to this same kind of data. And hopefully we get to a situation where it doesn't happen anymore that 59 beers just don't make it to the market, and where we can have a lot of innovation and a lot of amazing flavor experience for consumers. And that's where I want to end it right now. So first of all, thank you all. And I am hoping maybe that there will be some questions. I'm happy to answer a bunch of questions. But if that's not the case, I'm also happy to leave it at this and wish you happy holidays. Yeah, and I'm giving it a couple of seconds in case people want to type their questions. I also know I probably shared a lot of information in a short amount of time. So if you want to digest it first and then shoot me an email, again, contact@ester.ai. That's also perfectly okay. All right. I think we're gonna leave it at this. Yeah, so Andrew, I think we can end it here. And again, like, I can only wish you very happy holidays and a great 2021 for everyone.